The tree was breathing. That was what Officer Caleb Walker thought when his German shepherd stopped dead in the soaked grass and stared at the old oak like it had whispered his name. Dawn had barely broken over Millhaven Park, laying a thin gray light across the storm-torn clearing, where branches lay scattered like broken ribs of the night, and rainwater pooled in every footprint. The air smelled of wet bark, cold mud, and the metallic bite that comes after lightning has passed too close. Caleb stood 40 yards from the police tape, one hand on Ranger's leash, the other resting near the radio clipped to his shoulder. He was supposed to be doing a sweep. Nothing more. A fallen tree check after 3 days of heavy Oregon rain. A routine call. The kind officers finished with coffee gone lukewarm in the cup holder and a report nobody remembered. But Ranger did not move. The 6-year-old German shepherd had gone rigid, sable coat darkened by mist, ears high, amber eyes fixed on the swollen trunk at the center of the clearing. The oak was ancient, wider than 2 men standing shoulder to shoulder, its bark split open on one side where the storm had peeled it back in a long black scar. Water dripped from the wound in slow, steady beads. Caleb tightened the leash gently. "Come on, boy." Ranger did not obey. Not this time. He lowered his head, sniffed once, then gave 3 sharp barks into the hollow of the tree. The sound cracked through the morning and rolled into the empty park. Caleb felt something old and unwelcome move in his chest. Ranger only barked like that for one reason. A live find. Caleb looked around. Chief Ellenbrook stood near the path with 2 rescue volunteers, checking a map against the flood line. None of them had noticed yet. Caleb tried again, quieter. "Ranger, heel." The dog stepped forward instead, pulling with a strength that was not panic but certainty. His paws sank into the mud around the roots. He stopped at the split in the trunk and pressed his nose to the darkness inside. Then he whined. Not loud. Not scared. Just low enough to make the hair rise along Caleb's arms beneath his jacket. The woods seemed to hold its breath. Even the rain softened, falling in fine threads through the branches. Caleb unclipped the leash. "Show me." Ranger circled the tree once, then returned to the same narrow opening, scraping one paw carefully at the wet bark as if afraid to hurt whatever waited beyond it. Caleb crouched beside him. The hollow was barely 6 inches wide, a jagged mouth of black wood and packed mud. He clicked on his flashlight. The beam disappeared inside, swallowed almost at once. "What is it, boy?" Ranger barked again, then looked back at him with eyes that had never lied, not on a search, not in a storm, not in all the years Caleb had trusted him more than he trusted himself. Caleb pulled off one glove. The cold struck his fingers immediately. Slowly, he reached into the split. First, he felt bark. Then slime-cold mud. Then something soft. Fabric. Small. His breath caught. Behind him, Chief Brooks called his name, but Caleb did not answer. His fingers closed around the object and drew it out into the gray morning. It was a child's pink mitten, soaked through, trembling in his hand from the shaking he could no longer hide. A tiny plastic bracelet was caught around the cuff, caked with dirt but still readable beneath the mud. 4 letters. Lily. The clearing went silent. Ranger stopped barking and pressed his nose back into the hollow, breathing hard, listening. Then, from somewhere deep beneath the old tree, so faint it could have been the earth itself remembering how to speak, came one small sound. Caleb lifted his radio with muddy fingers and whispered, "Chief! I think someone's inside." 12 hours earlier, before the gray morning found them standing around that wounded oak, Millhaven had been drowning in rain. It came down in silver sheets over the 2-lane road north of town, washing leaves into the gutters, turning ditches into brown streams, making every porch light look far away and lonely. Lily Harper had been coming home from her grandmother's house with her mother, Grace, a soft-spoken school librarian who drove slow in bad weather and kept both hands on the wheel as if prayer lived in the grip. Lily sat in the back seat with a yellow backpack against her knees, humming to herself, one pink mitten on, the other pressed to the window where she drew little hearts in the fog. She was 7 years old, small for her age, with bright blue eyes, a gap in her front teeth, and the kind of trust that made adults lower their voices around her. The storm had already knocked out power across the east side of town. Branches scraped the road. Water rushed across the pavement near the old church turnoff. Grace slowed the sedan to a crawl, headlights shaking over the flooded lane. Then a fallen limb blocked the way ahead, not large enough to look dangerous, but large enough to stop a tired mother trying to get home before the creek rose higher. Grace put the car in park and told Lily to stay buckled. Her voice was calm. Too calm. That was the voice parents used when fear had already entered the room but had not been introduced. She stepped out into the rain to move the branch, her jacket snapping in the wind. Lily watched through the glass, her mittened hand flat against the window. Then thunder rolled low over the hills, and somewhere beyond the trees, a flash of light revealed a narrow service path leading toward Millhaven Park. What happened next would take only seconds, the kind of seconds that divide a family's life into before and after. Grace turned back toward the car. The rear door was open. Lily was gone. At first, Grace thought her daughter had stepped out to help. She called her name once, then twice, then again with the sound of panic breaking through. Rain swallowed every word. Her flashlight beam jerked across the wet road, the ditch, the tangled grass. No answer came back. Only water, wind, and the distant groan of old trees bending under the storm. By the time the first patrol car arrived, Grace was standing in the rain with Lily's yellow backpack clutched to her chest, her face pale beneath the flashing red and blue lights. Officer Caleb Walker came 10 minutes later with Ranger in the back of his cruiser. He said very little when he arrived. He never said much on missing child calls. He only opened the rear door, clipped the lead to Ranger's harness, and let the German shepherd smell the mitten Grace had pulled from the back seat. Ranger lowered his nose to the fabric. His ears tilted forward. His body changed. The playful warmth disappeared, replaced by a stillness that made every deputy nearby stop talking. Caleb watched him and felt the past reach for him with cold fingers. 5 years earlier, before Oregon, before the badge, before Ranger, Caleb had been a United States Marine on a flood rescue after a hurricane along the Carolina coast. There had been a little boy then, a collapsed dock, a dark current, and a final call over the radio that still visited Caleb in dreams. He had carried that memory home like an invisible stone in his chest. Since then, he trusted procedures. He trusted maps. He trusted time windows, scent trails, search grids, and the quiet discipline of his dog. He did not trust hope. Hope could make a man hear things that were not there. But Ranger did not follow hope. Ranger followed truth. The dog took Lily's scent from the road, then moved toward the tree line behind the old church, not fast, not frantic, but sure. Caleb lifted his flashlight and followed, boots sinking into the mud as rain slid down the back of his collar. Behind him, Grace whispered her daughter's name again, and the sound was so small that even the storm seemed ashamed to cover it. Ranger paused once at the edge of the woods, looked back at Caleb, and gave a low breath through his nose. Caleb knew that look. It meant the trail had become something stranger than scent. It meant the night was hiding a door no human eyes had found yet. Caleb Walker had learned long ago that some sounds followed a man farther than footsteps. For him, it was not thunder, though the storm kept shaking the hills above Millhaven. It was not the hiss of rain against his patrol jacket, or the soft clink of Ranger's tags as the German shepherd moved through the brush. It was the silence that came after someone called for help, and no answer came back. Caleb carried that silence beneath his badge. He was 38 years old, tall and broad through the shoulders, with close-cropped brown hair, a weathered white face, and gray-blue eyes that rarely stayed on one thing for long. Years in the United States Marine Corps had trained him to read a landscape the way other men read a newspaper. Broken twigs. Dragged leaves. Water moving the wrong direction. A bird gone quiet at the wrong time. But fatherhood had never come for him, and maybe that was why missing child calls opened something in him no uniform could protect. He did not have Lily Harper's photograph in his hand anymore. He had looked at it once beside Grace's car, under the wash of emergency lights, and that was enough. A little girl in a red school sweater. A crooked smile. One pink mitten raised toward the camera as if she were waving at the whole world. Ranger moved ahead of him now, nose low, body steady, every muscle tuned to the invisible thread the storm had tried to erase. He was a powerful dog, 6 years old, sable and black, lean through the ribs but strong in the chest, with amber eyes that seemed to hold fire even in the rain. Caleb had not chosen him because he was easy. Ranger had been stubborn from the first day at the K-9 unit, refusing shallow commands, ignoring handlers who wanted obedience without trust. But with Caleb, something had settled. They understood each other in the quiet places. Neither of them liked being touched too quickly. Neither of them gave trust away. And once they did not take it back. The trail led past the old church, where white clapboard walls glistened beneath the rain, and the bell tower leaned slightly into the dark. A search volunteer called from near the road that scent dogs could lose a trail in floodwater. Caleb heard him but kept walking. Ranger was not guessing. The dog crossed the service path, paused at a drainage ditch, then lifted his head toward the park beyond the trees. His ears turned forward. Caleb stopped with him. The air had changed. Less gasoline from the patrol cars. Less wet asphalt. More earth. More old leaves. More water running underground. Chief Ellen Brooks came up behind him, breathing hard beneath her hood. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, practical, the kind of woman who could calm a room just by lowering her voice. "Walker, the main grid is west of here," she said. Caleb kept his eyes on Ranger. "He knows." Ellen looked at the dog, then at the dark line of trees ahead. For a moment, only rain spoke between them. Ranger took one slow step forward and gave a low whine, not fear, not confusion, something closer to recognition. Caleb felt his throat tighten. "He is pulling toward Millhaven Park." Ellen's face changed. "That section is closed. Ground is unstable after the storm." Caleb nodded once. "Then we go careful." Ranger looked back at him, water shining along his muzzle. In that look, Caleb saw no doubt at all. Only the old promise that had carried both of them through worse nights than this. Do not stop. Not while there is still a scent. Not while there is still breath somewhere in the dark. The path into Millhaven Park had always looked harmless in daylight, the kind of place where children chased soccer balls across wet grass and old men walked slow laps with paper cups of coffee warming their hands. But under the storm, with the power out and the trees bending over the trail, it felt like the edge of another world. Ranger moved first, not running, not wandering, but choosing each step with a strange, careful purpose. Caleb followed with his flashlight angled low, watching the ground where mud shivered beneath standing water. Chief Ellen Brooks stayed behind his right shoulder, one hand on her radio, her face tight in the pale beam. The volunteers came slower, carrying rope, thermal blankets, and a medical pack wrapped in plastic. Every few yards, someone called Lily's name into the rain. Every time, the woods gave nothing back. Caleb hated that part. A name thrown into the dark became something fragile. It came back smaller. Ranger reached the first fork in the trail and stopped. To the left, the paved walking loop curved toward the playground and restrooms. To the right, an old maintenance path disappeared behind blackberry vines and waist-high weeds, marked with a rusted sign that read "Closed for repairs." The main search grid would have gone left. Any reasonable officer would have gone left. Ranger turned right. Ellen exhaled through her nose. "That path has been shut down for years." Caleb looked at the dog. Ranger's tail was level, his ears forward, his nose lifted into the rain as if he were listening to a scent no one else could imagine. "He is sure." A young volunteer named Mason shook his head behind them. "Could be deer. Could be raccoon. Floodwater moves scent all over the place." Ranger did not even glance at him. He stepped over the sagging chain and entered the old path. Caleb followed without another word. The brush grabbed at his pants. Water ran down from the higher ground in narrow ribbons, crossing the trail like veins. Somewhere underground, a drain gurgled, deep and hollow. The sound made Ranger pause. He lowered his head near a cracked concrete culvert half hidden beneath ferns, sniffed the opening, then pulled away sharply, not interested in going in, but interested in where it led. Caleb crouched, shining his light into the dark pipe. Nothing but rushing water and leaves. Still, the cold inside the pipe seemed to breathe against his face. "Chief," he said quietly, "does this drain connect to the park?" Ellen frowned, thinking. "Old storm system. Before the county rebuilt the road. Some of it runs under the north clearing." Ranger was already moving again. The maintenance path opened into thicker woods where the trees stood older and farther apart, their trunks black with rain, their roots raised like knuckles from the ground. Caleb felt the park change around him. The storm noise faded beneath the canopy. The radios crackled softer. Even the volunteers stopped calling Lily's name as often, as if the place itself had asked them to lower their voices. Ranger slowed near a patch of churned mud beside a fallen cedar. He sniffed, circled, then found something caught on a thorn. A thread of pale pink yarn. Caleb touched it with 2 fingers and felt his heart give one hard beat. He did not pick it up. He called Ellen over with a look. She photographed it quickly, then covered her mouth with the back of her glove. Caleb said nothing. He did not need to. Lily had come this way. Or something had brought her sent here. Ranger pressed on, now more urgent but still controlled. 50 feet ahead, the woods thinned into a clearing Caleb had never entered before. At its center stood the oak. Massive. Warped. Ancient. Its crown had been torn by the storm, and one side of its trunk bulged outward as if the rain had filled it with a secret too heavy to hold. Ranger stopped at the edge of the clearing. For the first time all night, the German shepherd trembled. Caleb saw it in the shoulders, a small ripple under wet fur. Then Ranger sat down, stared at the tree, and gave 3 short barks followed by one long bark that carried through the rain like a bell. Ellen's face went pale. Caleb knew she recognized the signal from past searches. Live find. The volunteers froze behind them. Mason whispered, "There is no one there." Ranger rose slowly, walked to the swollen trunk, and placed one paw against the split bark. He did not scratch hard. He did not panic. He only looked back at Caleb with those amber eyes, steady and pleading, as if the truth were already in front of them and all a man had to do was believe the dog brave enough to point at it. Caleb stood at the edge of the clearing with reins sliding from the brim of his cap, watching Ranger hold his paw against the old oak, as if keeping a promise. The German shepherd did not bark again at first. He only breathed into the split trunk, long and slow, then tilted his head and listened. That was what unsettled Caleb the most. Not the storm. Not the warped tree. Not even the scrap of pink yarn caught on the thorn behind them. It was the listening. Ranger listened the way a person listens outside a hospital room, waiting for one more sign that someone inside is still fighting to stay. Chief Ellen Brooks stepped closer, boots sinking into the wet ground. Her flashlight traveled over the tree, up the swollen bark, down to the thick roots lifting through the mud like old hands. "There is no way a child is inside that trunk," she said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. Caleb did not look away from Ranger. "He is not saying inside the trunk." Mason, the young volunteer, shifted behind them. "Then what is he saying?" Ranger answered before Caleb could. 3 short barks. 1 long. The sound moved through the clearing and seemed to settle into the rain. Caleb closed his eyes for half a second. He had heard that signal in training fields, in collapsed barns, near riverbanks after spring floods. A live find was not a guess. It was a declaration. Ellen lowered her radio. "Walker, talk to me." Caleb crouched near the base of the tree. The ground there was wrong. Too soft in one place, too hollow in another. Water disappeared between 2 roots instead of pooling. He brushed away leaves with his bare hand and found a narrow seam in the mud, a dark line where air moved up from below. It carried a faint smell of old concrete, wet moss, and something small and human that made his throat tighten. Ranger pressed his nose near the seam and whined. Caleb placed 2 fingers above it. Cold air touched his skin from underneath. "There is space below us," he said. Ellen knelt beside him now, all doubt gone from her face. "The drainage system." Caleb nodded. "The old line under the north clearing." Mason took a step back, scanning the clearing as if the ground might open beneath him. "Could she have fallen into it?" "Maybe," Caleb said. He kept his voice steady because Grace Harper was somewhere behind the police tape waiting for any word, and a steady voice was sometimes the only mercy an officer could give. "Or floodwater carried her toward it." Ranger moved to the split in the trunk, then back to the roots, then to the split again. Not confused. Connecting 2 points. Caleb saw it then. The oak was not just a tree. It was a marker. Its roots had wrapped around the old drainage chamber for decades, and the storm had forced water through the forgotten system until the earth shifted. The swollen trunk, the cracked bark, the breathing seam in the mud, they were all part of the same hidden door. Ellen called for the county rescue team, ground-penetrating equipment, and a confined space unit from 3 miles away. Her voice stayed controlled, but her eyes kept returning to the tree. "No digging until we know what is under there," she said. Caleb knew she was right. One wrong cut into the roots, one careless shovel into soaked earth, and whatever pocket of space remained below could collapse. But Ranger suddenly stiffened. His ears went forward. His body lowered. Then he gave. A sound Caleb had never heard from him on a search before, a soft, broken rumble that was almost a plea. Caleb turned toward the split trunk. From the outside, it looked too narrow to matter, just a wound in the wood, 6 inches across and black as night inside. But a child's mitten could pass through that opening. A ribbon could. A sound could. Maybe a little air. Maybe one small hope. Caleb removed his glove and handed it to Ellen. "Hold his harness." Ellen grabbed Ranger gently, though the dog did not fight her. He only stared at Caleb. Rain tapped against the leaves above them like fingers on glass. Caleb leaned close to the tree. "Lily," he called, voice low and careful. "My name is Caleb. Ranger is here with me. We are going to help you." No answer came. Only water dripping inside the hollow. He slid his hand into the crack, slow enough not to break the old bark, feeling mud, splinters, wet leaves packed tight by the storm. His shoulder pressed against the trunk. His fingers reached deeper, searching darkness by touch. Behind him, no one moved. Even Ranger had gone silent. Then Caleb felt something that did not belong to the tree. Soft fabric. Small. Soaked through. His heart struck once against his ribs. He closed his fingers around it, and the whole clearing seemed to hold its breath. Caleb drew the small object from the split in the oak as carefully as if the tree itself might break under grief. At first, it was only a dark shape in his muddy palm, folded in on itself, heavy with rainwater and packed soil. Then Ellen lifted her flashlight. The beam caught the color beneath the mud. Pink. A child's mitten. For one full second, no one breathed. The clearing, the woods, the storm, even the radios seemed to fall away from the world. Caleb turned the mitten gently, and a tiny plastic bracelet slid from the cuff, caught around a loose thread. 4 white beads showed through the dirt. "Lily," Mason whispered something, but the rain took it. Ellen's hand went to her mouth. Ranger pushed forward against her grip, not fighting, only reaching his nose toward the mitten as if confirming what he had already known. Caleb closed his hand around the bracelet, and for a moment he was not in Oregon. He was back in another storm, another night, hearing a child's name carried across water, and knowing time was thinner than anyone wanted to admit. He forced himself back with one breath. Then another. "Chief," he said, his voice low. "She was here." Ellen swallowed hard. "Or she is still close." Ranger answered before anyone else could. He pressed his nose into the split again, then lowered his body flat against the roots. His ears angled forward. His eyes did not blink. Caleb knew that posture. The dog was not tracking anymore. He was listening. Caleb knelt beside him and leaned his own ear close to the seam in the mud where cold air moved from below. At first, there was only the underground rush of water, muffled and distant, like a creek trapped in a wall. Then came something else. Not a word. Not yet. A small uneven sound, thin as a breath against glass. Caleb raised one hand, and every person in the clearing froze. Ellen shut off her radio. Mason stopped moving. Rain tapped the leaves. The old oak creaked softly above them. Caleb leaned closer. "Lily," he said, barely above a whisper. "If you can hear me, make any sound you can." Nothing. Then Ranger gave one soft bark, not sharp, not commanding, but gentle, the way some dogs speak to babies and the sick. From beneath the roots came a faint answer. A tiny knock. Once. Then twice. Ellen's eyes filled before she could stop them. Caleb pressed both palms into the mud as if he could hold the earth together by strength alone. "She is under us," he said. The words changed everything. The volunteers moved at once, but Ellen snapped her hand up. "Slow. No heavy digging. Nobody steps near the roots." Her command cut through panic with clean authority. Caleb pointed to the drainage seam, then to the swollen side of the trunk. "There is a pocket below the tree. The old storm drain runs under this clearing. Floodwater may have washed out the soil and left an air space." Mason stared at the ground, pale beneath his hood. "Can she breathe down there?" Caleb looked at the thin opening in the tree, at the cold air lifting from the mud, at Ranger still lying with his nose near the root. Seam, refusing to move. "She has been," he said. "So we do not take that away from her." Ellen called dispatch again, this time with a steadiness that made everyone listen. She asked for the confined space rescue team, county public works, thermal imaging, a pediatric emergency unit, and every sandbag they could bring. Caleb stayed kneeling. He lowered his face toward the seam and spoke in the calmest voice he had left. "Lily, this is Officer Caleb. Ranger found you. We are not leaving." Beneath the old oak, through wood, mud, water, and darkness, came the smallest sound. A child trying to cry, but too tired to finish. Ranger whined and placed one paw over the seam, warm and careful, as if keeping the little voice from slipping away. The first rescue truck arrived without sirens, rolling slowly over the soaked grass with its headlights dimmed against the rain. Caleb heard the engine before he leapt up, but he did not move from the roots. Ranger stayed beside him, one paw still resting near the breathing seam, his amber eyes fixed on the dark split in the oak. The dog seemed to understand that the smallest careless step could turn hope into silence. Men and women in yellow rain gear spread out across the clearing with the quiet urgency of people entering a church. They carried shoring boards, ropes, air monitors, thermal blankets, and long metal probes marked in inches. A public works supervisor named Daniel Price knelt near Ellen with an old laminated map of the storm drain system, its edges curling in the wet air. His finger traced a faded blue line beneath the north clearing. "There is an abandoned junction chamber here," he said. "About 8 feet down, maybe 10 after the washout. If the tree roots held the soil, there could be a pocket beside it." Ellen looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Ranger. Ranger did not blink. The rescue team began setting boards across the mud to spread their weight. No one stepped near the center roots. No shovel bit deep. No machine came close. They worked with hand tools, cups, small trowels, and patience, peeling the earth back one careful layer at a time. The rain softened to mist, then returned in cold beads that ran down Caleb's neck and into his collar. He barely felt it. All his attention stayed on the faint sounds below. Every few minutes he lowered his face near the seam. "Lily, Ranger is still here. Tap once if you can hear me." Sometimes there was nothing. Sometimes came one small knock, weak but real. Each answer moved through the clearing like a candle being shielded from wind. Grace Harper had been brought to the edge of the police tape by a deputy, wrapped in a county blanket, her face pale and stunned. Ellen would not let her close to the unstable ground, but Caleb saw her standing there, both hands pressed to her mouth, watching the dog that would not leave her child. He wanted to tell her they had time. He wanted to tell her everything would be all right. But honest mercy did not make promises it could not hold. So he kept speaking to the earth instead. "You are doing good, Lily. Just listen to Ranger." At the sound of his name, Ranger gave a soft bark into the split trunk. From below, after a long pause, came the faintest voice. Not a word anyone could understand. Only a thread of sound. But it was enough. Caleb bowed his head, and for a second the Marine in him, the officer in him, and the wounded man underneath both stood perfectly still. The past did not disappear. It simply stepped back. The team found the edge of the old chamber 23 inches from the largest root, hidden beneath packed clay and leaves. Daniel eased a fiber optic camera through a gap no wider than a quarter. The small screen glowed blue in the rain. Everyone leaned in, silent. At first there was only mud, roots, and trickling water. Then the camera turned. A pink sleeve. A small shoe. A child curled on a shelf of wet earth beside the old concrete wall, eyes closed, chest moving. Ellen whispered, "We have her." Ranger rose at once, tail lifting, but Caleb touched his shoulder. "Stay." The German shepherd lay back down, trembling now, not from fear but from the effort of holding still. The rescuers widened the access point inch by inch, bracing the walls as they went. Caleb asked permission to go first because Lily knew his voice, and because Ranger had made him part of the promise. Ellen studied his face, then nodded once. They fastened a safety line around Caleb's waist. He slid carefully into the narrow opening, boots finding the ladder rungs of the old chamber, flashlight strapped to his wrist, Ranger's quiet bark following him down like a prayer. The air below was cold and smelled of rain, stone, and roots. Caleb lowered himself until his knees touched mud. Ahead, in the dim beam, Lily opened her eyes. Her lips moved. Caleb leaned closer. The words were barely there. "Is the dog still there?" Caleb swallowed the ache in his throat. Above them, Ranger barked once, gentle and sure. Caleb smiled through the darkness. "Yes, sweetheart. He never left." Caleb moved toward Lily slowly, careful not to disturb the wet shelf of earth beneath her. She was small against the curve of the old concrete chamber, wrapped in her red school sweater, one mitten missing, her cheeks pale but her eyes open. Mud streaked her sleeves, and leaves clung to her hair, but when Ranger barked again from above, a weak smile touched her face. "I heard him," she whispered. "I kept crawling toward him." Caleb felt those words settle somewhere deeper than memory. He unclipped the thermal blanket from his belt and tucked it around her shoulders with hands that had steadied under harder skies, though never with more tenderness. "You did good, Lily. We are going home now." Above them, the rescue team widened the opening and lowered a small harness. Ellen's voice came down steady and warm, guiding every movement. Caleb secured Lily gently, then kept one hand beneath her back as the team lifted her inch by inch through the narrow space. The chamber seemed to hold its breath. Roots creaked softly. Water whispered through the old drain. Then daylight touched her shoes, then her sweater, then her face. The moment Lily cleared the opening, Grace Harper broke into a sob that sounded like a prayer finally allowed to breathe. Paramedics wrapped the child in warm blankets, checked her pulse, spoke to her in soft voices, but Lily kept turning her head. "Ranger!" she murmured. Caleb climbed out a moment later, covered in mud from his boots to his elbows. Ranger pushed past the rescuers. Only when Caleb gave the smallest nod. The German shepherd walked to Lily's stretcher, lowered his head, and placed his nose into her open palm. Her fingers curled weakly into his wet fur. No one in the clearing spoke. Even Ellen turned away for a second, blinking into the rain. Caleb stood beside the old oak and watched the little girl breathe, watched the dog stay close, and felt something inside him loosen after years of holding on too tightly. By the time the ambulance rolled away from Millhaven Park, the rain had thinned into a pale mist, and the first real light of morning touched the torn branches above the clearing. Grace Harper rode beside her daughter, one hand wrapped around Lily's fingers, whispering words no one else needed to hear. Ranger watched the ambulance until its taillights disappeared beyond the trees. Only then did he sit, soaked and muddy, his chest rising and falling as if he had carried the whole night inside him. Caleb knelt beside him and rested a hand on the German shepherd's neck. For years he had believed some losses stayed locked in a man forever, sealed beneath duty, silence, and the things he could not change. But that morning, beside an old oak with roots tangled around a forgotten storm drain, something inside him opened just enough to let air in. Chief Ellenbrook stood near the tree, looking at the split trunk, the muddy seam, the careful work of the rescue team. "He heard her before any of us knew to listen," she said softly. Caleb looked at Ranger. The dog leaned against his knee, tired but steady. "That is what he does," Caleb answered. 3 weeks later, a small pink ribbon was tied around the oak, not as decoration, but as remembrance. Lily placed it there herself, bundled in a blue jacket, her mother close behind her. When Ranger stepped into the clearing, Lily smiled and held out her hand. He walked to her gently, and pressed his muzzle into her palm like he had known her all his life. Caleb stood a few feet away, quiet, watching the child laugh in the sunlight. No one called it a miracle out loud. They did not have to. Some grace arrives with trumpets. Some arrives on wet paws through mud, rain, and the stubborn heart of a dog that refuses to leave anyone behind.